Hey, this is the hardcore icon, just incredible. Check out Once Upon a Turnbuckle. It is a badass podcast, and you'll find me on it. Now, that's not just the coolest, that's not just the best. That, my friends, is just incredible. Check it out.
Hi again, everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of Once Upon a Turnbuckle. And this is one I have been looking forward to pretty much probably since I started doing this show. And we've finally been able to make it happen. I have got a bona fide legend finally to bring you. I have had legends on before, but it's so good to have this guy on. You will know him. Everyone knows him. You'll either know him as Aldo Montoya, or you'll know him obviously as just incredible PJ Polaco. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing okay, man. How are you?
I'm good. Yeah, not too bad. Yeah, all the better for speaking to you, mate. I'm glad we've been able to finally get here. It's great to talk to you.
Yes, I'm happy to. We finally connected, man. Very happy.
Cool. So I, I- my shows really they take quite a loose kind of format, but what I love, especially when I'm talking to guys in the industry, particularly ones that I grew up watching, is really kind of we'll delve into your story with wrestling. We'll kind of go back and where you first discovered it through to your experiences in the ring. Wherever it takes us.
Sure.
And I didn't really know where to start with you. I will say you are one of the guys that I grew up watching. I was a '90s sort of late '80s '90s fan, so I knew you as Aldo Montoya. You were on my TV pretty much every weekend. Um,
I'm
let's
sorry.
no. Hey, we'll get into your feelings on that sort of part of your career in a bit, but
Sure.
it was great. I thought that character really did encompass that era of wrestling for me. But let's start off by delving into your story then. In terms of wrestling, before you even got into the ring, were you a fan in the early days, sort of, before you decided to do it yourself?
Oh yeah. God, I mean, I remember, geez, the first time I really got into it, I think it'd have to be around 1983. I was 10 years old, and I remember this is back in the day where I still had a black and white TV, if you can imagine. And I know you're from the UK, correct?
Yep.
Okay, I'm from Connecticut, and in Connecticut, we had maybe, and this is going back a while. We only had maybe because we didn't have cable at the time, or I didn't have cable in my room. This is still, we had maybe one big TV in the household, the
Mm.
color TV, and then I had in my room, and I was happy to have it, a little black and white crappy one, but. I remember we had rabbit ears, and it caught the local New York station where WWF at the time, had their program. And I remember them showing the highlights of Hulk Hogan beating the Iron Sheik
Wow.
for the WWF title for his first run there.
Mhm.
And this is we're talking going into like the WrestleMania stuff, and that's what really got me hooked as a fan. And then being that I was from Connecticut, there was a lot of WWF, but my mom and dad had friends 30 minutes, west of Connecticut, but almost, in the New York, 'cause Connecticut's right near the New York border.
Mhm.
And, there was just, there was a different station that had WTBS, which back in the day had the 2 hour slot of WCW, if you remember that. Well, I
Yeah.
mean, again, you're from the UK, but over here,
Mm.
it wasn't very much on the East Coast. But I started watching the NWA and saw Ric Flair for the first time. And back then, I only saw Flair and those guys in the magazines, the Pro
Mm.
Wrestling Illustrated, etc., all the blood and stuff. And I was fascinated because you didn't get that with the WWF. So when I started to, get a little bit of the NWA/WCW, when my mom and dad would go over these friends' houses that got it, we didn't have it.
Yeah.
I thought it was amazing because it was so different than
Mm.
the WWF, and I was like, that's what I want to do. And that's when I really started to think this is, something I really, really enjoy.
Cool. Yeah. Was it readily available for you to go, and were there an abundance of places you could go to train once you decided that you did want to try it?
Oh God, no. I mean, we're talking, geez. Okay, I graduated high school in 1991. I was 17 and I didn't go right to college. I didn't end up going to college at all, but I'll explain the story.
Mm.
So I figured in my mind I was going to take a year off in between before I went to college and work a full-time job, save some money. So I was working at a grocery store, a food store, carriages, bagging groceries,
Mm.
etc. And we'd have like a 15-minute break, right? To, eat some chips, drink a soda, whatever.
Yeah.
And I'd always take the time because I loved it so much because we had magazines all the time, and we had like a bunch of the old wrestling magazines. So I remember on break, I would just go grab my chips and soda, and I'd read the magazines in the aisle. And this is pre-internet, mind you.
Yeah.
There were no wrestling schools really talked about. Kayfabe was still a thing, you
Mm.
know. And I did see in the back of Bill Apter's Pro Wrestling Illustrated, there was a big one-page article, or not article, but one big page advertisement. Hart Brothers Pro Wrestling Camp, Dare to be Great.
Huh.
And I was like, wow, I'd never, I wanted to get into it because I was doing backyard wrestling and
Yeah.
stuff like that for fun, just
Yeah.
taping it on a camcorder or whatever and watching it back with your buddies.
Mm.
But when I saw that advertisement, I was like, holy cow, this is, you know, so I ended up working to save up money. And back then it was $3,000 and I had to buy a flight because it's cross country. It's
Mm.
Connecticut's all the way on the East Coast geographically, and Calgary's literally all the way on the
Wow.
northwest. So I saved up money, got the ticket there, and the summer of 1992 is where I trained at 18 years old
Wow.
to become a pro wrestler. So yeah.
And what better start, to train under the Hart brothers? Did you actually get? I know you were trained by. Am I right in thinking Chris Jericho, Lance Storm
Well,
around that
mostly
time?
Lance. Mostly
Yeah.
Lance. Chris was there, and so was Lance the year before. So Chris would pop in, but Lance
Mm.
was the main instructor. Keith Hart was the heart of the Hart brothers at that time,
Mm.
and Bruce Hart was around, but they would only come around once a week. To kind of see what was going on. And
Mm.
but Lance would do most of the training, and Lance was an amazing trainer. To this day, I don't know if he's still training, but not too long ago, he had the Storm Wrestling Academy, which did
Yeah.
amazing work and
Mm.
put out a lot of talented people. So that's something Lance was great at. Actually, and then Lance is an amazing pro wrestler, great pro
Mm.
wrestler, but he was a better trainer than pro wrestler. So that tells you how good he
Wow.
was.
Yeah, it does.
Patient. You know what I mean? Patient,
Hmm.
really took his time with everybody, and taught us, as good as anybody could have. I could not have asked for a better trainer,
Yeah. And your path, we'll get to it. Your paths crossed again, sort of, later in your career
Yeah,
as well, in quite a
yeah,
big way.
yeah,
So we'll
yeah,
get
yeah,
there. We'll get there.
yeah. We'll
So
get there.
so that was 1992. You were starting training, and
Yep,
you actually
yep.
had your first match on TV, um, with the WWF at least in March '93. I've got noted down here against Lex
Yeah,
Luger. So that
yeah.
was very, very
My,
quick.
it's wild. Well, here's the thing. I Okay, so it was July and August. It was an 8 week camp. We trained 5 days a week. I had the weekends off, and I lived up there. I lived above a strip club, believe it
Nice.
or not, in a small town outside of Calgary called Okotoks, Alberta. 'Cause it was just cheaper,
Hmm.
and we'd take a bus into Calgary every day. Like the guy who was running the camp with the Harts, Ed Langley, had bought an old school bus, those big yellow, ugly school
Yeah, yeah.
buses, to bring us, the guys and the gals, into town and to work out.
Mm,
We started with, God, I think 8 or 9 students.
mhm.
And by the end of it, only 3 finished.
Oh
Guys
wow.
started dropping off first week,
Yeah.
for the second week. And by the end of it, it was only myself, Brett Farrell, who's wrestling out of Toronto, Canada, still to this day.
Mhm.
And this other kid who I don't think ever really, he did some jobbing work for the WWF early on,
Mhm.
Wilford Baduke, but he never really
Okay.
made it anywhere.
Mm.
But he was a Canadian kid also, and it was just the three of us that finished the camp and got any regular work. So yeah,
Wow.
and
Nice.
that being said, there was a reason I was going there. I went home in August after the camp was over.
Yeah.
But again, this is pre-internet. I don't know anybody
Mm.
here in Connecticut, New York.
Mhm.
I just knew from what I saw in wrestling magazines and what they had in the sheets, the dirt sheets.
Mm. Yeah.
So it was hard. I didn't know any. There was no camaraderie here. I didn't know any fellow wrestlers, anybody.
Mm.
So I ended up going back to Calgary. And because they were starting up a small promotion called
Mm.
Rocky Mountain Pro Wrestling, and on October 16th, 1992, I actually had my first match in Calgary when I turned 19. And I ended up staying for 10 weeks because
Mm.
Calgary ran every Friday night at a small place. We did about 100 people,
Mhm.
but it was great. I ended up working with the guy I trained with, Brett Farrell. We had a
Mhm.
couple of matches there. I worked with Lance Storm. I worked with Chris Jericho. So it was great because it was,
Mm.
believe it or not, I mean, just think about it, the first 10 matches, you got a young Jericho, a
Yeah.
young Storm, and myself,
And you. Yeah. Yeah.
and it ended up, it was a real hotbed for young stars, and it was
Mhm.
a great experience. But I wasn't making any money at all. So at the end, it was around Christmas time, 1992. I was broke because you're
Mm.
basically paying to survive
Yeah.
out there, right? Because you're not getting
Mhm.
paid to wrestle,
Yeah.
and I couldn't get a job because I didn't have working papers. I was just there kind of like on a vacation, you know what I mean, with Canada, because the immigration was a pain in the
Mm.
ass. But I came back home around Christmas time, and then it was like, I'm back. Like, what do I do? Right? I don't know. Again, I don't know anybody. So I don't know how I found this out. But somewhere I found out that there was a small wrestling ring inside a workout gym, like a regular gym.
Yeah.
And they had a small ring that was used for boxing and pro wrestling. So I ended up finding out about that, and they would train, like an open gym session where
Yeah.
guys could just go in and mess around. I ended up meeting Paul Roma, if you remember
Okay.
Paul
Yeah,
Roma,
I
right?
remember. Yeah. Yeah.
He used to be one of the Four Horsemen,
Yep.
one of the, not the good version of the Horsemen, obviously. And he used to also tag team with Hercules,
He did. Yeah.
Power and
Glory.
Glory,
Yeah.
back in the
Yeah.
day. So Roma, I met him, and I also met a young man named Tony DeVito, who ended up. I'm sure you've heard of Tony
I
DeVito.
have.
He
Yeah.
wrestled as one of the Baldies. in
Yes.
ECW
Yeah.
and Ring of Honor. He also had a tag team with called the Carnage Crew in the early days of Ring of Honor. So he was there. So through all those, we'd go every Sunday. We became friends, and I don't know how this happened, but I think, oh yeah, this is how it happened. I had heard that the WWF had a house show in a town called New Haven, Connecticut, is where Yale University actually is,
Okay.
that town. And I went to the house show, because you were always told, like, always bring your bag. And I was so naive and stupid. I just rolled up to the house show. With my bag, not knowing a soul, nobody knew I was coming. Nobody'd heard of me, and Tony Gurria was there as one of the agents, what you call producers now. And I went up to him. I introduced myself. I said, "Mr. Gurria, my name is PJ Walker, aka PJ Polaco. That was my real name, was Polaco. But I wanted to use Walker because I figured, I was back then wrestlers were huge, right? Especially in the WWF. So I wanted to be a flyer. So PJ Sky Walker. That was the
Ah, okay. Got you.
that was the intention. That's why I used the Walker gimmick. But anyways, so I stayed for the show. Tony was very kind, let me watch the show from the back, and then he's like, "Well, who trained you?" And I was like, "Well, sir, I was trained by the Harts." And he goes, "Really?" So that really kind of opened up his ears, because like, well, the Harts are pretty legit, and everybody's famous. Calgary's world famous for training.
Yeah.
And he goes, "Well, we're starting a new show in Manhattan called Monday Night Raw. If you're interested, we'll pay you $150 to go do some jobs." So that's what I did. I
Yeah.
think it was, like you said, I think it was in March
Mm.
where I got my first match as a jobber at the old Manhattan Center against the narcissist Lex Luger before he
Yeah.
did the red, white, and blue. Remember when he'd
That's
come
it.
out with the mirror, with the
That's it. I
mirror?
remember, yeah, it kind of date
Yeah,
stamped. It's shown, what era this was and kind of how early it was in, especially in Monday Night Raw terms.
correct. Yeah, those were like literally some of the first episodes of Raw
That's
I was on.
amazing. That is
Yeah.
amazing.
So that's how and then I did good.
Mm.
And for about a year and a half, I was on a lot of the Northeast circuit, like the
Yeah.
TV circuit,
Mm.
because again, I was good, I was young, and back then the business was kind of down.
Mm.
This is coming off the heels of the Hogan Warrior era. And the attendance was down, so WWF and the steroid trial was happening with
Yeah.
Vince. So they wanted to keep it close to Stamford, Connecticut, their headquarters, which is still to this day. So we would do TV tapings in New York, Connecticut, Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, Boston, Massachusetts, and stuff. And again, these are all 2, 3 hour drives for me. So
Mm.
not only are they getting me, they're saving money on travel. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They don't have
Yeah.
to fly people around. So
Mm.
they call me all the time. So I got quite a bit of work. And Vince knew who I was, and etc. So again, I believe this is 1994, around July, August. They called me up and said, "Look, would you be interested in coming to the office? We got a ring set up at our TV studios, and the TV studios were across the street from the office. And they wanted me to go train with the Undertaker and Brian Lee. They were bringing them in for the double Undertaker, right?
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
fake Taker
Yep.
against, the double, whatever, for SummerSlam.
Mm.
So, anyways, I was there with those guys. It was just the three of us in a ring, warehouse kind of thing, just working out, going through. Taker was showing Brian how to do Taker.
Yeah.
So on the last day, it was a Monday through Friday deal. On Friday, we did a dress rehearsal for Vince and Pat Patterson.
Mm.
So they came down, and Brian Lee was done up like Taker, did the
Yeah.
entrance and everything. No
Did a
music,
good
but you know
job.
what I mean. Vince wanted to see what it looked like,
Yeah.
so we went through the match, and everything went fine. And I was supposed to work with him live on Raw or whenever it was the following TV taping.
Mm.
So Pat Patterson gets in the ring and he's like, "Man, starts asking me questions." He goes, "Who are you trained by? You're good, kid." And I said, "Well, the Harts." "Oh, hey, Vince, this kid trained by the Harts." And Vince is like, "Oh, all right, whatever." Kind of no sells it. And he goes, "Kid, what nationality are you?" And I'm like, I'm Portuguese. He goes, really? Hey, Vince, this guy's Portuguese. I do a terrible Pat Patterson, but bear with
That's
me.
that's cool.
And anyways, so the last thing was he goes, do you speak Portuguese? I said, yes, sir, I do. And he goes, oh my God, Vince, this guy speak Portuguese. And that really kind of popped Vince. And well, come to find out, they had an Aldo Montoya already drawn up, ready to go. They were looking for a
Okay.
Portuguese wrestler that spoke it.
No way.
So I happened to be at the right place at the right time,
Yeah.
and from there, August of '94, I signed my first contract, 3 years. And at first, Aldo was not supposed to be the Power Ranger mask wearing
To
guy.
be a soccer
Uh,
player, is that right?
Soccer player, right?
Yeah.
Because the World Cup,
That's
the World Cup
yes.
was coming around to the States, I believe, and
Yes.
they just wanted to capitalize. That didn't end up going through,
Yeah.
so they came up with the Aldo thing drawn up, and that was it, man. That's how the ball got started. But just the right amount of right place,
Opportunity.
right
Yeah,
time.
absolutely. I mean,
I mean,
it.
and that's how the business is, but not just this business. I think it's like that with TV, with movies,
Yeah.
all that kind of stuff. So I
Yeah.
was just, and of course I was good too, but there's a lot of good guys out there, that don't always get looked at or the proper opportunity. So again, just timing, man. It's all about
Do you, do
timing.
you think that opportunity to train with the Harts did a lot there as well? Because obviously
Oh
you
yeah.
you, you referenced that Tony Gurria and Pat Patson cottoned on to the fact that you obviously had a pedigree by being
Yes,
trained
of
by
course.
them.
Yep. Yep.
So again, if that opportunity not come up, your career could
Right.
have gone in quite a different direction, maybe.
Yeah, oh, 100%. Because that just kind of opened up their ears a little bit. Because
Mm,
Calgary, again, world famous for the dungeon,
yeah.
and blah blah. So
Mm, yeah.
not everybody, like I said, not everybody finished because they were grueling, man.
Yeah.
They really
Yeah.
were. Like before you even got in the ring, you had to run miles, a couple miles, not crazy, but 2 miles.
Mm,
That's enough. 500 free squats, push-ups, sit-ups, and this is before you even take a bump for the day.
yeah.
So you're doing about an hour's worth of hard training, and then you start taking bumps like
Yeah.
crazy, locking up, hitting the ropes, and yeah, so it was
It's hard work
having that
technically.
pedigree, that training, and that by using that name was
Mm.
worth it. It was
Yeah.
worth the sacrifice. And then I come to find out that there were wrestling schools an hour and a half from my house in
But
New York.
you were meant to go
But
to that one.
yeah, and
Good.
I don't think if I did, do you remember Johnny Rods? He was
Yes.
trained Taz and stuff.
Yeah.
He and Dreamer, they were only an hour and a half from me. And at that time they were training Dreamer and Taz and stuff, but
Okay.
I don't think it would have worked out for me if I hadn't gone to the
Mm,
Heart. So
maybe
again,
not.
there's just everything sort of aligned.
There's one thing I really wanted to ask you about before we go into Aldo Montoya too much.
Sure,
Is
sure.
there was you got a bit of airtime, inadvertently or not. Well, probably,
Mhm.
if it was planned, but you got a bit of airtime on Royal Rumble 94 because a few months before
It
that.
was 95, the Royal
Ah,
Rumble.
yeah, it was. You were in that one, but you actually got you were part of the pack. You were featured on the package promoting the Razor Ramon IRS match because a few months before
That's right.
you had a
Yep,
victory over IRS on TV
that's right.
in an
Yep.
era where this is probably only a matter of months after obviously they did the 1 2 3 kid,
Correct.
setting
Yep.
Razor. Did you feel at that point was it planned to be a one-off, or did you feel like there may have been chance for PJ Walker to kind of come through as a bit of a 1 2 3 kid sort of thing?
I thought there was a possibility for it. I knew they were interested in moving forward. I just had a feeling. And then they also had put me on house shows against IRS. But that
Mm,
it was more for the angle with Ray, like
yeah.
kind of riffing. It was really between Razor and IRS.
Mm,
Razor just made IRS look bad, right? Because if Razor didn't distract him, I wouldn't have got the roll up win. So, but again, it just helped me get notoriety, and they
yeah,
right there already trusted me enough to
exactly.
give me a win. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So, and then I just think that they were looking because they were very cartoony as well.
yeah.
So PJ Walker as a kind of like a you know a just wearing some rocker-esque
Mm,
tights and
yeah.
with the tassels and just it wouldn't have worked. So
Yeah.
in that era, because they wanted the glitzy colorful guys like
Mm.
remember Sparky Plug
I do, yeah,
before he was
yeah,
Bob Holly. They just
yeah.
tore up Mantar. Remember
Yeah.
him?
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah, we do. Bless him. Yeah, Mike
yeah.
Howard King.
So
So let's
yeah,
come on to Aldo then. What were your first impressions of the look of Aldo Montoya with the mask? A lot has
well,
been said about the mask over the years.
yeah. I actually have one here. It's funny.
Amazing.
Yeah, I'll bust it out. Hold on, let me grab it. I'm moving, so I'm sorry about the
No,
video,
that's cool, mate.
but because I was just cleaning my room, and I found this. So here's uh here's the mask.
There it is.
Yeah,
Wow,
so yeah, I didn't expect to have that.
that's
But
cool.
anyway, so they back then they had and I'm sure they still do. They had an art department that
Hmm.
kind of you know lets people see what their ideas are. And I looked like a Power Ranger. Do you remember the Power Rangers?
I do, I do. Yeah, yeah,
They were like a very they were a kids show and
yeah.
very kind of cartoony,
Mm,
and that's what I looked like. I looked like I had Road Warrior style shoulder pads,
yeah.
and the mask looked cool. And I was balding at the time for real, but
Mm,
they had the open thing, and I was supposed to. The character, the drawing had flowing hair coming out of it.
yeah,
It looked badass. I had kick pads. I was like, this could work. you
yeah.
know. But when they handed me the outfit, I was like, this looks nothing like that badass, you know.
That's a shame,
But
mate. Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't too far off. But they kind of cheesed on the pads, and it wasn't.
Yeah.
Again, they weren't what they are today. They were still very. They only had two seamstresses, and most of the time they were making Shawn Michaels. And I love Shawn. He was one
Mm,
of my best friends there at the time.
mm,
But they were making new outfits for him every week. So
yeah,
Aldo didn't. You know what I mean? Wasn't a
yeah.
priority
No, bless
for
him.
new gear. So it is
But
what
but
it is.
but you did mention some of the highlights then. So yeah, you got to run out in the Royal Rumble,
Yeah, I had a
'95.
hell of a. I was
Yeah,
in there for a while,
yeah, you were actually. Yeah, I mean, no,
and I
it was
actually
a
had a good. I had a good go with Shawn. Actually,
you
if you
did.
watch it,
You
yeah,
did, and it was a quick rumble. That's the only one I think or the only one up to that point where they were doing it a minute in between. So it was fast paced, and
yeah,
so
yeah.
to have any kind of time out there was good,
Yeah.
And
Yeah, it was great. It was a great experience.
yeah,
It was a lot of fun. I had fun out there, and I went back and did one in '96 as well.
you did.
But that one was not as good. I mean, it was the same, but I didn't show. I don't know. I was in there for a short time, so
Mm. During '95, a lot is said about '95 as being one of the worst years in wrestling. I have fond memories of it for my own
I
reasons.
do too.
It sticks out. It was the first year that I was able. We got cable at home for the first time, so I was actually able to keep up
Gotcha.
weekly with it, so I could actually see
Yep.
what's happening in between, which was great. So you were on my TV a lot because you did things like you were featured on Mania, you were featured on
Yep.
Superstars,
Yep.
those kind of runs. There's one match from that year I absolutely love, and I kind of think it was made for Aldo Montoya at the time. Um,
Uh,
Survivor Series '95 opened up with the underdogs against the Body Donners, and you had all the kind of mid to lower card guys on there: Barry
yeah.
Horowitz, Bart Janela, the
Yes.
kid, Wonder
Yep.
Street Kid, and all that. Was it ever an intention for you to be part of that? That seemed to be exactly where you should have been at that point.
With the kid.
Well, with the kid opposite the kid, because you could have been on the Barry Horowitz team with
Yeah.
Bob Holly
Yeah.
and
I
that.
thought so too.
Yeah, was it
You
not
know.
discussed, not given as an option? No.
I never know. I mean, the most I'd ever gotten after the debut, and they gave me a lot of wins with against jobbers and stuff.
Mm,
And then I did a match with Jeff Jarrett,
mm.
a non-title, and I pinned him.
That's when he was the IC
And
champion, wasn't it? Yeah.
yeah, and
Yeah.
then by pinning him, it was a non-title match. We did promos the following week, and a week after that, I got the title match. Yeah,
Mm,
and but I lost that. So that was kind of the most
yeah.
I ever got there as far as you know anything
Yeah.
big. But again, it's I was so young and green.
Yeah.
I really didn't know. I did the best I could, but I'd never worked under a mask before.
Okay.
And when I debuted in the WWF, realistically, I probably had under 20, 25 matches,
Right.
if you
Wow.
really think about it. So, having a WWF job, never being on TV,
Mm.
25 matches under my belt, but really not really any world-class guys other
Mm.
than squash matches. It
Yeah.
was crazy.
I
But
think you were kind of shoehorned into the in '96 the Jake Roberts Jerry Lawler
yeah,
feud
that's right.
for a
Yeah, I
little bit.
forgot
You know,
about
so
that.
they gave you those moments. They obviously
Yeah, they did.
trusted you
They
enough
did.
to
They
sort of slot you in. But when did it become
yeah.
apparent to you then towards the end of your WWF run that you were moving on or you needed to move on? What was that transition like from there, then popping up
Sure,
in ECW? What kind of
sure.
happened there?
I I was getting, in my opinion, I was getting good. I
Mm.
was really starting to make it, and like be confident out there. And I remember I was working with Chris Candido, Skip at the time of the Body Donnas,
Mm.
and we were going out there opening match and the B towns, the smaller towns.
Yeah.
But we'd put about 2,500 people in those towns, and they were fun crowds. And Candido and they needed some time from us, because it was a 5 or 6 man card.
Mm.
And the A shows had a lot of the bigger stars and
Yeah.
tons of guys. So I didn't have as much time when I was on the A towns. But when I worked Candido on the B towns, we'd go 25 minutes sometimes,
Wow. Okay.
really, but ripping it up. I mean, this is a
Yeah.
young Candido, a young Aldo, or just incredible to me.
Mm.
We were going out there doing like Steamboat Flair, seriously, like spot for spot sometimes, like all these false finishes, and nobody was doing that stuff at the time.
Yeah.
But we were doing that ECW-esque high, you know what I mean, high energy
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
stuff that wasn't being done.
Yeah.
So, well, again, when '97 rolled around, and I just felt like, wow, I'm really coming into my own. And Scott Hall and Kevin Nash. Scott was one of my best friends as well, and Scott and Kevin gone to WCW.
Mm.
And I stayed friends with Scott and talked to him all the time. And he's like, Puss, he's called me Puss. Hey, Puss, why don't you just get your release and come down to WCW? We'll get you paid. And I'm like, okay, that sounds great, because they're not doing anything with me. And
Mm.
Aldo was a great starter gimmick for me. I liked it as a starter gimmick, but it
Mm.
was time to move on. So I went to Vince. I requested a meeting. I go to Stamford. I sit in his office, and I said, Vince, look, I appreciate everything you've done for me, but I think I've plateaued as Aldo. I really feel like I'm coming into myself. You're not guys aren't doing anything with me. I understand that,
Mm.
but I'd like my release.
Mm.
You know, and he goes, well, I can't do that, pal. He goes, we've invested too much time. You're young. You could have a future here. And again, I was like 23 years old,
Yeah.
still a very young man if you think about it.
Yeah.
Uh, and now I have the experience of being on the WWE, WWF for a couple of years,
Mm.
working 200 plus 250 days a year, which
Yeah.
is a lot, when you
Yeah.
hear about the schedule,
Yeah.
we
Absolutely.
work. So I had a lot of experience that I would not have had. So I felt, look, I could do something here. Vince said no. He goes, but here's what I want you to do. He goes, I'm going to send you to Memphis, and this was around the time. Do you ever watch The Rock's show, the the fake show that he has? I don't know what it's called, but with him and Rocky Johnson, when like that sitcom of him
No, is
coming
that
up,
the Young Rock? Is that the one?
Young Rock, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
No, I know.
When he was in
Haven't.
Memphis,
Mm.
I was down there as well.
Okay.
Because there were
Okay.
times where he was driving by himself, and I would just gotten married. I was with my wife. He would follow us sometimes in his rental car because he had no idea where he was going. So around that era, Vince sent me to Memphis because he wanted me to learn to work as a heel, right?
Yeah.
And then he was going to um, he was going to send me back up and whatever, rebrand me.
Mm.
So I went to Memphis, worked down there. It was horrible, but I was learning to work as a heel,
Mm.
whatever. And the last, I was, things weren't working out financially, especially because, you only make $40 a night down there.
Right.
And Vince was paying me, but still, Vince was paying me $500 per week.
Mm.
But $500 a week is $2,000 a month, which is fine. But I just got married. I have an apartment in Connecticut.
Mm.
I am now renting a car in
Mm.
Memphis. I'm renting a room in Memphis, on a weekly. So
Mm.
I'm losing money, right?
Yeah.
There's no way that 500 is going to cover everything because
No.
I'm paying for two apartments, two cars, one at home and one in Memphis. I didn't pack up all my shit and leave. I couldn't do that at the time.
No.
So I was ready to go home, and ECW and Candido were and Dreamer and those guys, they were down in Memphis doing an angle with Jerry Lawler. Because if you remember, well, maybe you
Mm.
do, maybe you don't, but
Yeah.
ECW,
Yeah.
they were doing that thing with Lawler.
Bit of an
Uh,
invasion type thing, wasn't there? Kind of,
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes. And that's where I reunited with Candido as friends, just talking. And he goes, "Man, you got to meet Paul Heyman, dude. Paulie's, blah, blah, blah. ECW's really cooking. We got our first pay-per-view coming up, barely legal." He goes, "Man, you should come to ECW." I said, "Well, I would love to. It sounds great." So I met Heyman. Heyman spoke to Vince. And instead of my release to go off on my own, he released me to Heyman. And
Okay.
we worked out a deal. And that's how the ECW thing started,
Wow.
Yeah, it's kind of wild,
That
Again,
is.
timing, right?
I was going to say, yeah, sort of right place, right time, everything. Right
That's it.
opportunity.
But
So
that's a lot of people don't see that and don't understand it.
no,
That's how it works in a lot of places in entertainment, really.
real
You
sliding
get it.
doors moments, isn't it? That's what they call them.
Yeah,
Yeah, you
yeah.
miss it. You can
Yep.
go a completely different path. You mentioned that you and Candido Skip were really kind of you'd already been having those style of matches, those hard hitting,
Sure.
high impact matches. Was it much of a transition then when you started with ECW? Was that in you to have that style, and you were finally able to release it?
I think so. Yeah.
Mm.
At first I was scared, really.
Mm.
And even I heard Van Dam talking somewhere on a podcast somewhere about him going to ECW for the first time, and he was kind of nervous about it because you see the blood and guts stuff, you
Yeah.
see balls and axle, with the Taipei glass and all that shit, and I was like. I don't do that. I don't want to do that. And
Mm.
I remember Candido saying, "No, no, no, that's those guys. That's their stuff." But there's real wrestling too.
Mm.
We got guys like Shane Douglas. He's our world champion, and I knew Shane from WWF when he was Dean Douglas.
Okay.
Uh, because he was there for a little bit too
Mm.
before he went back to ECW. So I was like, okay, as long as I could wrestle, I'm down. And I right away I got into my first angle slash. It wasn't really an angle. It was a kind of like a series of matches,
Mm.
which we called the summer series. Ended up calling the summer series, I believe. It was me and Jerry Lynn. We had a series of matches all over the country, and really great matches. So
Mm.
that was really the start of just that stuff. So yeah, Jerry Lynn was my first real program in ECW, and
Mm.
some of the best matches I've ever had to this day. Because Jerry
What?
Lynn, I mean, he's one of the
Yeah.
best.
It, and this is where I was a little bit deprived of this kind of thing because over in the UK, ECW wasn't on every week. I think there was one channel that
Right.
picked it up for a little bit of time. I didn't
Yeah.
get exposed to it. I read up there was a UK based wrestling magazine called Power Slam over here, which
Okay.
really wrote up on all the indie stuff, and they were big on ECW. So I learned about it through
Sure.
that. Never got to see it. So this would be
Oh
a little
man.
bit more of an education for me, in terms
Sure.
of what you did there. But one of the things that really jumped out at me, and I said we would come around to it, is then you got paired up with Lance Storm as the Impact players. And
Yes. Yeah.
was that one
Yeah.
of your kind of what do you say, one of your highlights there, or at least in the early run?
Yeah, I think in ECW, sure.
Mm.
I mean, it was just such a magical time in wrestling. You know, we really had WWF was heading into the Attitude Era. ECW, I mean, we were doing great business, man. I mean, we were doing 2,500 to 3,000 seaters every night.
Yeah,
We wrestled Fridays and Saturday nights, but doing great business, man. And then there was WCW, obviously, with Nitro, and so the business was hot,
yeah,
and it just, we had this lure of we were the like punk rock.
yeah.
We were that, there was chocolate and vanilla, which is WWF and WCW, and then there was the punk rock ECW, and we had that credibility, no pun intended,
Yeah.
of this cool little upstart promotion. And then we started having video games, and getting that the cable television deal on Spike Television, which was a big thing over here. But yeah, it was wild, man. It was a hell of a ride. And then towards the with Lance and I and the Impact players, it was, man, we were having great matches. It was such a cool gimmick, and to work with, the guy who trained me. So
Yeah.
we had this great chemistry. And if you look at it, my gimmick, and the reason I wore jean shorts, it's sort of, I always joke, it's the ECW uniform, so to speak, the jean shorts and the t-shirt. But all I had, and because everything happened so quickly, all I had was Aldo Montoya's gear.
Right.
Um, and I remember the first time I ever wrestled was as Aldo in Queens, New York, against Chris Candido. I came out with
Yeah.
the mask. And ECW crowds in those days, man, they were brutal. They started calling all kinds of, here comes Aldo Montoya in the ECW Madhouse of Extreme. But anyways, I took the mask off. I put it down. I'm like, F
Yeah.
WWE or WWF, whatever. I'm extreme, and whatever. We had a hell of a match, as we always did. And then the following week, I'm like, well, I got nothing to wear. They wanted to debut me against Jerry Lynn. It was both
Yeah.
of our debuts, actually. Um, I'm like, well, I'll get some black ladies' leggings, like the black tights that they sell
Yeah.
for ladies,
Yeah.
and a pair of baggy jean shorts because that was kind of over.
Yeah.
And I saw, those shirts that said "Got Blood." They sold them at a store called Hot Topics here in America. It was kind of an alternative rock kind of
Yeah.
store,
Mhm.
and it was like Got Blood wasn't a wrestling thing; it was a vampire thing because
Okay.
like the vampire culture was kind of big at that time,
Yeah. Yeah.
like emo stuff.
Yeah.
So, anyways, that's where the Got Blood. It was more of a vampire thing, and it just became my thing. Which I still sell that shirt somehow on Pro
Wow.
Wrestling Tees. But anyway, it was just again, just everything clicked for some reason. It was really cool.
That's
Really
very
cool.
cool. And to pair you with someone like you say, it's got chemistry there. So you already could make a name for yourself as
Sure.
yourself, but also playing off of that kind of, yeah,
Yep.
partnership with Lance.
Oh yeah, and what I was gonna say is, and I veered off.
But
I had the jean short kind of grunge look,
mm,
right? And Lance was the wrestler,
it's
but
very
we were
straight,
we were
isn't it? Yeah.
we were two opposites, right? I
Yeah.
had the attitude. I was kind of doing the Scott Hall suck it thing,
Yeah. Yeah.
and Lance, and if you remember, and he had the tights, but remember he did the flex, and I did the Kevin Nash. That was the Impact Player pose. He was doing
Yeah.
the Sean, and I was
Yeah.
doing the Kev with the kendo. So
That's
it just all was magic. And it
and
was really just us having a good time, you
and
know.
and that's part of it, I suppose. Were you
Yeah.
having more fun at ECW
Yes.
than you probably were,
Oh,
towards the end in
and
WWF?
and the thing is too, not only the looks were opposite, but we were like everything I was, he
Mm,
was not,
mm,
and everything he was not, I was. Like we were
yeah.
just, we both could work, but he was a different kind of worker.
Mhm. Yeah.
And it was just, I don't know, it just worked, man. It just blended very nicely. And then he got over to gig in WCW, and
Mm,
we wrestled a match for his, he put me over. I think it was at Hardcore Heaven 98 or something
yeah.
like that. But or 99.
Yeah.
But again, it was fun while it lasted. And what people don't know is towards the end, I was making more money in ECW than I did in WWE.
Wow.
I was making 2,500 a week wrestling Fridays and Saturdays in ECW, and
Yeah.
I wasn't making that in WWE, you
No.
know? So, and and Paul has the reputation of, bouncing a lot of checks. He did to some people, but I tell you one thing, man, he knew whose bread he had to butter because I was always paid.
Oh wow. Okay.
I kept, I didn't say anything, but Paul knew he took care of his top guys, the
Yeah.
RVDs, the Sabus,
Yeah.
myself, Shane Douglas, Tommy Dreamer, and
Mm.
he took care of me, you
During
know?
WWF did move. You mentioned the attitude, the round about the time the Attitude Era was coming in. So
Yes,
WWF moved into that kind of the more hardcore style. They had their own version of it. Um,
correct. Yep.
everyone talks about how the Attitude Era had an impact on then the wrestling world as it the wrestling industry as it carried on. Where do you think ECW factored into inspiring that side of the WWF?
Oh, I think it had a lot. I think
Mm,
it had a lot. A lot of the storylines, the more
mm,
adult orientated, because really ECW was adult pro wrestling. It
mm,
was not meant for kids. It was, and that was what I felt was so cool about it and so genius was, we don't want to be WWE. We don't want to be
mm,
WCW. They're very different.
yeah,
WWE was a little more cartoony, and we were a little more, we were like a rated R, rated X,
yeah,
adult orientated pro wrestling, and I thought that fit us great,
yeah.
because you don't want to be a WWE light or a
No,
WCW light,
no,
so
because they
we
never
were
last, as we've seen. So,
right. Yeah.
but
Yeah.
ECW did. I mean, ECW did to a point, and we'll come to.
To a point, and it's sad
Mm,
because, and I really don't even know the full thing, but man, we were still drawing,
yeah,
um, towards the end. It wasn't like I remember the last two shows we did were two sellouts at the Hammerstein Ballroom at 3,500 people,
wow.
for pay-per-views and stuff
Mm,
and TV tapings. And it was a matter of, I think Paul wasn't getting the pay-per-view money fast enough
yeah,
to keep up with bills and to keep up with creditors. And I think too, by the end, I don't know everybody has their own take on it. I really don't know what to believe,
mm,
but I think Paul was just at some point finally just done. I'm
yeah,
sure if he wanted to, he could have probably got more money from Vince to keep it afloat, but I think he was ready
mm,
to leave and then
yeah.
to kind of move on because it was a lot on Paul. He
To,
was trying to get TV deals towards the end and, 24 hours, literally he would stay and work 24 hours, calling you at 3 in the morning, flying out to Los Angeles. I mean, and there was no office, there was
mm,
no team. It was Paul Heyman and Tommy Dreamer and Bubba Ray Dudley and I think Taz,
mm,
excuse me, where the like Bubba helped book the towns and acquire the towns and rent
yeah,
the buildings. Taz did the merchandise, and my wife actually sold the merchandise at the shows, at the live events and
wow.
the TVs. Yeah, and Dreamer did that stuff as well. He was part of the T-shirts and stuff. So
Mm,
there was just a lot going. And Taz ran the wrestling school as well. We had a wrestling
wow.
school, so it was just a lot of moving parts, But really, Paul was doing it mostly himself, And
Yeah.
like I said, those guys helping, But it was just, I think he was ready to move on,
Drawing those
you
kind of
know.
crowds, like you said, like 3,500 towards the end there. That is not an indie promotion anymore to
No,
be
oh
drawing
no,
those kind of crowds.
yeah,
And I think the one thing about ECW that I did pick up on, I mean, the fans are loyal. You
yes,
knew if
yeah,
you were in with them, and I think WWF probably started to see a lot of the fans almost like infiltrate their
sure,
crowds because there was a lot of
yeah,
people calling for ECW during their
sure,
shows.
yep,
Um,
100%, yeah.
for a little bit of time here, your world title run in ECW, we can't sort of gloss
Oh,
over
yeah,
that. You were
yeah, yeah,
given
yeah.
you were given the
Forgot
chance to
about
offer.
that one.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but yeah, just talk us through the because I think you won the title from Tommy Dreamer just like minutes after he had won it. Was that the
yes.
plan then for him to have that shorter reign to then move to you, or did something else go on there?
From what I recall, Mike Awesome had won the title, and then some stuff was happening where I think they didn't have a deal. They were on a handshake deal, and Mike Awesome was the ECW champion and got an offer from WCW, like a
Mm,
couple $100,000, 300,000, whatever it may be, but a lot of money.
mm,
And and I think there was an idea that Mike didn't. There was a little bit of an issue. Mike didn't want to drop it.
Mm.
I don't remember, but there was a problem with we got to get the belt off of Mike Awesome,
Yeah.
and we didn't know how to transition. So we had and Taz was in WWF at the
Yeah.
time. It wasn't WWE yet, but we'll just call it WWE.
Mm.
He was with them already, and he purposely came over for a 1 or 2 night deal to beat Mike Awesome at the
Mm.
ECW arena. And then there was obviously Taz couldn't keep it either.
Yeah.
So Taz beats Mike Awesome. Mike Awesome loses the belt. He goes through the crowd off to WCW because it was so crazy that he didn't even come in the locker room because we were, he was afraid that the boys were going to beat him up,
Right.
So it was like that kind of shit.
Yeah.
It was, ECW was a lot of times, believe it or not, like it could get heated back there. We
Yeah.
took it very seriously. So, anyways, Awesome leaves through the crowd. They kept him in a waiting car, so he's off. He did his business, dropped the title, and then obviously Tommy Dreamer comes in and ends up working with Taz.
Mm.
And on a separate night,
Mm.
Dreamer goes over, beats Taz naturally because Taz has to go back to WWE.
Yeah.
And then after Dreamer won, he says this great speech, and I literally come in out of nowhere, challenge him right here, right now, and I've clear, he's been through this grueling match, right, with
Yeah.
Taz for the world title, and it's just finally his big moment. Tommy Dreamer does it,
Mm.
and here comes the dastardly heel, takes he's got his great joy and victory, and
Yeah.
take it right from under him and beat him 1, 2, 3 after his manager Francine turns on him as well.
Yeah.
So
What a way
that's
to
how
get
that went.
heat?
Yeah.
You already got heat,
Right.
but
Yeah.
what a way to cement yourself as,
And I only found out an hour before the show.
wow, okay.
Or I think we were actually in the show because remember there were a lot of the internet was just starting to be a thing. We
Yeah.
still did the 1-900 numbers. Remember the one nine
Yeah,
hundred
yeah.
hotline? We
Uh-huh.
still did those. So there was, things would slip out. So
Mm.
we had to keep things very kayfabe. Like I said, I didn't know that I was going over or I was even part of it until about an hour before it happened. And
Wow.
I think it was at the ECW Arena in Philadelphia. The show had already had been started and stuff, and I wasn't booked. I did not have a match. And all
Mm.
of a sudden, I was like, well, that's weird, because I was prominently featured, and to not have a match, and then boom, Heyman pulls me aside and goes, "You're beating Dreamer for the belt," and I'm like, okay, cool, and literally like that, man.
That's insane. That's insane.
Yeah, it's but that's what was cool about ECW
Yeah.
too, and also being a professional now. This is before the time of, and I can't stand this about today.
Mm.
And I'm not being a hater, but like I hate that people have everything called, have
Yeah.
everything. I'm going to hit you with 4 punches
Yeah.
and do this move and hit the ropes to the left. I mean, everything is so scripted to a T, where we went out there and improved a
Yeah.
lot. And
Yeah.
my matches were at least 60%, 70% improvisation,
And that's part of the
because that's, yeah,
I can't watch it nowadays really because I think
yeah,
there's too much. You can just see it coming. They don't even try, in my
no.
opinion, to cover up. Oh,
And
I'm just waiting here for. It's
yeah, and
lost
that
that whole
sucks.
spontaneity.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
that's the thing is you can't have a Flair Steamboat and me and Jerry Lynn, and I'm not putting my matches up there with
Mm.
Flair Steamboat. That's not the point. But the point is, a lot of those matches, man, you can't have all of it like scripted out. You
No.
can't.
No.
I think if you're good and you've been wrestling long enough, you should be able to call a match out there.
Yeah.
It's not that hard. You know
No.
what I mean? I think if you watch wrestling long enough, if I say duck an elbow,
Mm.
hit you with a drop kick, you could duck the elbow and hit you with a drop kick.
Yeah.
Block, hit me.
Yeah.
It's not that hard,
I
man.
don't know if they do it. If it's so much, they teach the old school way, if I call it, on the indies nowadays. Because I've gone to
Yeah.
shows over here and it doesn't look quite as set up as that. Whether they're just trying to make it absolutely perfect for TV,
Yeah.
I don't know, but it doesn't
I don't know,
resonate.
man. I think it just I don't know, man. It just loses it a little bit for
Does
me. You
maybe
know,
so? Yeah,
wrestling isn't supposed to be so clean. It's supposed to be a little dirty. It's supposed to be a little bit of a, fights don't look like that.
no,
You know,
no, exactly that. Yeah, Jim
yeah.
Ross said it best. I think I've heard him on this podcast saying, "Why would you stand outside the ring with three of your mates, just wait for someone
Wait
to
for
fly
right.
out? You wouldn't do that.
Yep.
You step aside and be like, oh, there you go."
And don't get me wrong. I mean, I've had matches. I mean, most of my matches, the way I like to do it is I like to have a nice opening, couple
Okay.
of a couple of high spots that we do call in the back.
Yeah.
And then I get when I'm working as a heel, for example, I like to also have the spot where the baby face can either miss something or I
Mm,
could catch him with something. Maybe both sell and then I'll take my heat. I'll start beating the crap out of him, do my move set, grab
yeah.
some holds, work out of it, give him a little hope,
Mm,
chop him down, maybe take it, whatever, and
mm.
then give him his big comeback. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
then comes the
Absolutely.
excitement, the back and forth, the false finishes.
Yep.
So I like to have the beginning and the ending
Mm,
called,
yeah.
pre-planned, but the middle, I like to improv all of that
Oh yeah.
stuff because
That's the
that's
best way.
where it can get fun,
Yeah.
because you don't want to have the same match, all the time. And like
No.
Shane Douglas and I had so many classics in there, man. I had one with him at the ECW arena where we literally only had a couple of things called,
Mm,
and the rest was just improv. And it was, I mean, not putting myself over, but
no.
Shane was masterful in those days. And you couldn't have that match if we'd have scripted everything because you don't know how the fans are going to be reacting.
No.
You may have this move set, and you think the fans are going to react this way, but they're going a completely different way, and you got to be able to pivot.
Yeah.
And you can't pivot if you're going A to B to C.
No.
So that's just an
No.
opinion.
No, I'm fully with you there, and I think
Yeah,
probably you guys are probably part of the last generation that could properly
yes,
do that because
I believe so.
it's
Yeah.
just started to die out a bit more when obviously you guys weren't around as much.
Yeah, and I mean, some guys are still doing it. Like I know Randy Orton is one of the guys that could still go out there and do those kinds of
Yeah.
matches where you don't have to call a lot. And there's a bunch
Mm.
of other good workers, but the young men and women now, and they do. Don't get me wrong, they're
They do
amazing.
fantastic stuff. Yeah, yeah,
They're I mean amazing. I'm not putting them down in any way,
yeah. Mm.
but it's just a different thing. It's a different thing than what
Yeah,
we did. You
totally.
know.
Um, I'll scoot a little bit further now into when you came back to WWE just very quickly.
Oh,
So
yes,
Justin, they came back as Just Incredible. So they didn't bring you back as Aldo Montoya.
correct. Thank God.
They didn't quite bring you back in the same vein that you were in ECW. Obviously, it seemed that you they had to soften you off a little bit. Was that kind of
Yeah.
part of the deal, or was that did you feel you gravitated away from that once you left ECW?
No, I would have loved to have done the whole ECW thing, the way I was presented, but a lot of what I did, mind you, Stone Cold has jean shorts,
Yeah,
that he comes out with a lot. He's
yeah,
also
that's true.
bald. I'm bald.
Yes,
Not that again, we're two totally different animals, but I also have a bit
yeah,
of an attitude. And I can, but he's the top guy in the company, so you
yeah,
can't even go close to him,
no,
and then also, I do the tombstone as my finish. The Undertaker does a tombstone.
yeah,
So I can't do that. I do a super kick as my setup. Can't do that because Sean does the super kick. So I had to change a lot. So the
mm,
tag team I debuted the first night it came back. It was Jericho and X Pac were in there
yeah,
having a match and whatever. But Pac was about to get beat. I come down with a steel chair. Boom, hit Jericho. We
mm,
start teaming up on them, and then they introduced that we're going to be in a tag team called X Factor,
mm,
and we had a little bit of a run there, and we were doing fine. I loved it. I loved working the tag team. I thought we could have been a hell of a team.
yeah,
We'd had matches against the Dudley Boys. We had a feud with the Dudley Boys. Had
mm,
matches with the Hardys. Benoit and Guerrero. I remember, I think it might have been in the night we wrestled in London before the infamous plane ride from hell.
oh,
It
okay,
was
yeah,
It was we had a four-way at the I think it was Insurrection pay-per-view. It
Yes, the
was
one.
X Factor versus the Dudleys versus the Hardys versus Benoit and Guerrero. It was like the four-way tag team.
Right.
I mean, think about that. The Hardys, the Dudleys, X Factor, and Benoit and Guerrero.
Yeah.
It was a
On a
hell of a match.
on a UK pay-per-view. Now, back in my day, they used to
Yeah.
send out a little bit of a weaker kind of card there. That's a hell of a
Yeah.
match. Yeah.
That's a hell of a match. And they had us in a lot of stuff like that.
Mm,
And we were going in a positive direction.
mm.
I mean, we wrestled the Hardys in many towns. Like I remember wrestling the Hardys semi-main event in Madison Square Garden for the tag
Wow.
team titles and stuff like
Wow.
that. And we were supposed to have a run with the titles, but then the invasion happened where WWF bought out WWE bought out
Yes.
WCW, and
I
then
wanted to talk about this. I want to talk about this because this is one of my favorite topics.
uh,
So
uh,
me and a buddy of mine have said that we are going to be doing like a 2 or 3 episode set
uh,
where we kind of take apart the invasion, like what happened, what didn't
oh,
happen, maybe what was
I'd love
done.
to come on. I'd love to come back and do that with you because I have so much
Dude,
on that.
that'd be
Oh,
amazing. Yeah, we
I
might
would
have
love
to
to
set
do
that
that.
up. But your
Yeah, we
take on it,
should.
just briefly here, then your take on it, because
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
you were
yeah.
kind of you were there, it was happening, and you were kind of one of the prominent parts because you went over to the alliance as part of ECW. So
Correct.
what from your perspective, how did it change things, and how did it feel, kind of just having all that kind of going on?
I might butcher this. I'll try not to because it was so long ago if you
Yeah,
think
yeah.
about it. Um, we were having a match, I think with the Dudleys. It was something I don't know. There was a match with ECW guys. I think it was me and Lance Storm because I'd broken up with X Pac.
Mm,
However, there were all ECW guys in the ring,
mm,
and it looked like we were going to fight like they were going to be Team WWF, and then somehow it became ECW. Like
yeah,
in the beginning of the program, and we were in Atlanta, and when we signaled that me and Lance and I and the Dudleys we were going to do something, and there might have been another ECW guy in there. Maybe Raven was there. I think it was
mm,
Raven too. Um, and it became ECW. The crowd popped. Like, so now there's ECW,
mm,
there's WCW, and there's WWE. And at the
mm,
very end of the show, I think it was Stephanie, she came down and said, that, because I think Shay, I don't know, remember who had bought who, but
mm,
Stephanie had now joined ECW and WCW as the alliance, bro.
yeah,
In the beginning of the program, ECW as its own entity, like when they had three different promotions
yeah,
for, with hour one of Raw, it was fire, dude. The crowd was so hot. And
mm,
then at the end, literally not 2 hours later, when they
mm,
swerved it and Stephanie said, my brother Shane, I think, and I are gonna blend ECW and WCW and call it the Alliance.
mm.
It just went.
Heat was what?
It,
Yeah,
dude, they took the air went out of the room. I never saw 15,000 fans in a major arena go from hotter than hell
yeah.
to shit because they had an opportunity, and this
They
is where they
did.
screw up all the time, to have WCW, WWE, and ECW, the top promotions that were literally a year ago fighting
Yeah.
for dominance in the wrestling game.
Mm.
All of us with intellectual properties, all of us on pay-per-view, all of
Yeah.
us having games and action figures.
Yeah.
And now you have an opportunity to have those three under one umbrella. They could have had so much classic shit. They could have had ECW against WWE, or just all kind. They could have even had different brands, because I was
Yeah.
told that they might even have different brands, having their own shows and shit, and then having a Super Bowl of wrestling, like at
There's
WrestleMania or something.
so much they could have done with that.
So much,
They
and
killed it within about what, 8 months, 7 months, if that.
yeah,
They just
yeah.
completely turned it
It
around.
was it was it was the worst. It could have been something that shit could have gone on for so long.
Yeah.
Could have so much more money, but
It
again, the
was.
WW they screw up. They get they're too much in their own head, and I think they wanted to dismantle those brands.
This is exactly what I
Um,
was going to say. Do you think it was
yes,
classic? Whether it was Vince,
yes,
he would have had a call in it somewhere. His way of basically cementing superiority over this, saying we had this, and I can do this, and I can
yes,
make it go away.
yep.
It's
I fully believe that.
yeah, it's a shame that it's a shame.
Yeah, it is. It
So
really is.
where did your position then? Because obviously, during that angle, you had a place within the alliance.
Uh,
Once that was all settled, Survivor Series came, and then it was all WWE again. Where did you factor in then, and sort of what happened for you from then on?
Not much,
No.
unfortunately. It was just, I was lost in the shuffle. And this is 2002-ish, late 2002-ish,
Mm,
into early 2003. And I was just I was just nowhere, going nowhere, working guys like Sean Stasiak
mm,
on the bottom half of the card, or guys of that nature, putting over guys like that.
mm,
And there's others too. But I was working with guys like Randy Orton when he first came out of OVW. We worked together on the road for a while. Guys like Shelton Benjamin when he
yeah,
was first coming up. So again, I became that utility player that's very good, having that opening match and getting these
yeah,
guys over,
yeah,
and teaching them really. To this day, I still talk to Randy, and he never forgets what we did together. Like, kind of, I
mm,
really helped. I helped a lot of the younger guys, when they first stepped through. I mean, they did the
yeah,
work obviously afterwards, but
yeah,
the initial guys that worked with me when they first came through. And again, it showed the trust that the WWE had, putting them with me, because I would do the right thing and teach them as
yeah.
best I could.
You were in CM Punk's debut
I
with the
was, yeah.
ECW brand then, but when he came over, so
Yeah.
memories of that sort of. Did you have a vision of him at the time that he would become what he's become? But
Oh no, not at all. Not at all. Not at
no,
all. I'd heard very little of him. Because in 2003 I'd got fired
mm,
from the WWE. I famously, and this wasn't really talked about much, and it's not important, but I was
mm,
late to an airplane. Me and Jeff Hardy were late, go on a charter flight. To be
mm,
honest, we were fucked up at that time, and we were late. Bottom line,
yeah,
and the plane was there with Stephanie and Hunter, and they're on the runway waiting for us, and we're called.
mm,
We're lost, but we're right around the corner. We're still in the hotel room. Miles and miles away,
ah,
and they're waiting for us. So they fired me. Hardy, they didn't, because he's Jeff Hardy. So I
mm,
think they suspended him and sent him to rehab or something like that. But
mm,
anyway, so then I went from there. I did TNA
mm.
and Ring of Honor, and in 2005, I got the call for the first one night stand, and the Impact players are reunited again in the
Wow.
first match.
Was that? Did you feel then that there may have been a chance for the
Oh
ECW
yes, oh
resurrection
yes,
as it was? Yeah.
yep, yep. It was still hot. Again, the Hammerstein Ballroom sold out
Mm,
under ECW, but it was under Vince's brand and control.
yeah.
But man, the same crowd. It was magic. It was like no time had passed, and wrestling was in a really weird place because there was no competition really. TNA was
Mm,
starting, but they were still not what you know what I mean. It
yeah.
was still not very what it became
No.
later on. But yeah, they just ECW could have done, if they would have kept it. And again, this is Vince trying to do too much and changing it to benefit him.
Mm,
Is the first one was a real ECW show. The 2005 One Night Stand was legit ECW. They did Terry Funk, they did Mick Foley, they did the Dudleys, they did myself and Dreamer and Lance and everything, and
mm,
it felt real. The
yeah.
second one was a complete WWE. The second One Night Stand, even though it was ECW brand, to
Mm,
relaunch the ECW as a company, um, just was a complete WWE show. It was John
yeah.
Cena versus RVD. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean,
That kind of
was that the
stuff.
one where RVD got the belt, didn't he? He
Yes,
defended
I
he
mean it was
defended that.
cool. It was
Yeah.
cool and all, but it was, you know, Rey Mysterio versus another. I think it might have been Benoit. I don't know,
It's not
Benoit
ECW.
Guerrero. It was
Mm,
all. It was all. Look, they were in ECW for like a cup of coffee. Literally, I think
yeah.
Guerrero had like 5 matches with ECW, and
Mm,
Benoit the same.
mm,
So to me, they weren't ECW guys.
no.
But anyways, I digress. But yeah, the writing was already on the wall. I stayed there, I think, for about a year.
Mm,
The pay was horrible. They were
right.
paying all the ECW guys, and this is under Vince's contracts, 52 grand a year.
Okay.
I can't, you know what I mean? I can't
Yeah.
be on the road, and then you're paying taxes on that money. They don't
Mm,
take taxes out, so that 52 becomes 30,
right.
and then you're spending money on the road.
Yeah.
I was losing money.
Yeah.
So
You're paying to be with them essentially. Yeah.
I just stopped going to the shows. I remember one time I was supposed to leave and I didn't have money to get to the airport,
Wow.
because again, I was losing money.
Yeah.
And and I said after that, I was like, screw this. I'm not gonna sit here if I can't afford to go to the airport. So I no call, no showed. But I talked to Johnny Ace, John Laurinaitis, and
Mm,
okay, just come to the next week's show. No big deal. Next week, same thing. I just didn't. I was in a
yeah.
bad place. I was in a bad place. And I just didn't. I was done.
Yeah.
And I saw the writing on the wall. So
I think the good thing, what I can take as a fan, anyway, looking back at you, is you are not known for, you're not remembered for that, and you are remembered for your peak when you were in ECW, and when when you when you were ECW and tag team champions, the world champion. For me, your legacy will always go back to that point. What do you feel? I got time for two kind of bigger questions here. The
sure.
first one is what do you want your legacy to be that you're remembered for? That everyone will look back on wrestling history and know what Just Incredible
I
was all
I
about.
just would like them to remember my entire ECW run. I'd like to be known for that. It was a good 3 years
Mm,
of, really some of the best work I've ever done,
yeah,
really,
yeah,
creatively. It's a
mm,
shame that I didn't get more time to do that. DCW was great. I
mm,
had great dance partners to dance in the ring with, so to
yeah,
speak, to work with. Creatively,
mm,
I could do a lot of what I wanted to do. So I had just a lot of great opportunity, bro. And
yeah,
and that's what the genius of Paul Heyman was. We weren't overly scripted, we weren't overly booked.
mm,
We really had the chance to go out there and to find it for ourselves, like a great actor. Not saying I'm a great actor. I'm saying like the great actors get a chance to improv. Again, I'm back
yeah,
with the improvisation.
mm,
And there's stuff that the writers, and I hate that it's so, and it kind of has to be because it's a television show with
mm,
segments live as well. You need
mm,
writers, but we didn't have writers. We had Paul Heyman and the collaboration with myself. We had Paul Heyman collaborating with Shane Douglas,
mm,
and I think, and then we collaborate with ourselves. That's the best way to do it. That's how they did it in the 70s and the 80s,
yeah,
in WCW, and I won't even say WCW, in the NWA days, the territory days.
yeah,
And that's when you could really, and because you feel like it's your own.
yeah,
You're not saying stuff that's unnatural,
yeah.
and so it was just, I'd say those 3 years in
Mm.
ECW, I'd love to be remembered for.
And like I say, I think if I was to say to anyone when I start telling people that you're on the show and that they'll remember you from that. So
Sure,
you know
sure.
the what you were dealt with at the end, I think part of the experience probably, but it doesn't define you. So
Yeah, I hope not. I mean, and again, I got to work in between. Like I said, I worked for TNA for a while. I did Ring of Honor. I went to All Japan, did many tours for All
wow,
Japan
okay,
for
yeah,
wrestling. So I stayed out there. I traveled the world. So,
mm,
you know, and it's slowed down to where I am today. I'm not retired, but I'm trying to take as many bookings as I can. I'm still in good shape. Not like I'm not ripped or anything, but I mean good shape meaning I'm
good,
not injured. You know,
yeah,
thank God.
yeah. So
So I'm 51 years old and I have my health, and
and there you go. and you
That's not a horrible thing.
looking at the landscape of the wrestling world at the moment,
Yeah.
where would Just Incredible fit most?
Ooh,
Where would you like to fit, really, or where do you think it would you would be most comfortable?
that's a great question. That's a really good question. I would say TNA.
Okay.
I would say TNA because AEW is I think listen, I think Tony Khan has been great for the business.
Mm,
He gives a lot of people employment and
mm,
a lot of great people are working there. I don't like the product at this point, but
mm,
they've been entertaining it many times and I in the beginning I really enjoyed AEW.
yeah.
Not so much today. But that's again, that's neither here nor there. I like but I wouldn't fit into that. I don't think. WWE, no, I'm way past my prime in that
Yeah.
aspect. Nor would I even attempt. But TNA, would be a nice little place to wrestle. I think it's not that. And again, I'm not looking for that. I
No,
wouldn't
no, but
want. But if I had to pick one, it would be TNA. I think that would be the right fit for me at this stage in the game.
who would you like to work with? I don't know.
Oh, I don't even know who's there really.
No, to be honest, I don't either. I know Joe
I
Hendry.
know, but
He's
I
awesome.
know, I know Dreamers there, and I know that they're doing some nice things. I
Yeah,
hear good things, so
yeah,
and they're making moves. So again, and you know what? I wouldn't mind working for my friend Billy Corgan in the NWA. That might be
absolutely.
something interesting,
Yeah,
So
yeah,
something like that, I would be a good
very
fit
cool.
for me at this age,
Mm,
at this stage.
very cool. Last question then, and unfortunately, I'm going to have to bring. I don't want to bring this to a close. This is amazing. This has been fantastic. Thank you so
Oh,
much.
I hope it's been okay, brother.
It's been awesome. Everything that I would have wanted it to be. There's one question
Good.
that when I first started this show that I was asking all the guests really, and particularly I'm interested with this with yourself. So in terms of obviously wrestlers talk about WrestleMania moments. They would want
Sure.
that one on the biggest stage of them all. Um, if you could have a WrestleMania moment for any point in your career, when would it have been? Who would you wanted to have
Oh
been
wow,
facing?
wow. Um, could it have been anyone?
Yeah,
Like a
anyone, past, present,
fantasy,
anything.
right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I got to do it. I'll say it quickly so I don't take up too much time. I
No,
got
go
to
for it.
work a fantasy match once, and it was an ECW. It was me against when I was world champion against Scott Hall.
Okay.
I personally brought him in as if Paulie did it as a favor to me. And having Scott Hall on your show in 2000 is still a big deal.
Mm.
And we got to work the main event. And the funny thing was, it was in Poughkeepsie at the Mid Hudson Civic Center, where him and the 1-2-3 Kid, and we had a lot of TV tapings. It's the one where Kid almost killed himself in that $10,000 bounty match where he did that dive from the top turnbuckle and he hit the floor and he missed, like he
Okay.
slipped
Yeah.
and
Right.
he ran away with the money. But
Yeah.
anyways, that's the building. The building meant a lot. So I
Yeah.
got to work with Scott Hall in that building. That's the point. That's great. So WrestleMania would have been Shawn Michaels
Ah.
because he was my spirit animal. I wanted to be like Shawn. I
Mm,
thought Shawn was brilliant.
mm,
Still is, in my opinion,
yeah.
as a performer, as a whatever he's doing in NXT, as far as just as he's still brilliant.
Mm,
But I would have loved to have had Shawn, peak Shawn against peak Just Incredible. That would
awesome.
have been dope, dude.
That would
That
be.
would have been dope.
That would be.
So
Shawn
that would have
Michaels
been
was.
it.
He was my hero growing up. He was who I
Mine
wanted
too,
to
man. And
face. So yeah.
I got to interact with him and work with him a little bit.
Yeah.
And actually, I'd love to talk to you at another time about this, man. There's a whole era where I went and stayed at Sean's house when he was opening up his academy in '99.
Oh wow.
And I worked for TWA, Texas Wrestling Alliance, and I had the belt down there for a little while.
Wow. Yeah.
That's, yeah,
There's
when
so
I
there is so much we could have delved into. This
oh,
was half of
we
this
got
is
to
trying to narrow
do
it down.
another one, man.
Absolutely,
Like
man.
the one where you bring your mates on and we talk about
Yeah.
the that period that we wanted to talk about.
Yep.
We'll mention this stuff because I got so much shit, dude, to talk to you
Absolutely.
about.
Absolutely.
So we'll have
We'll
to.
do that. He will be absolutely stoked to know that you want to do that.
Yeah, man.
We will make
Yeah,
that happen. Absolutely.
yeah.
So Literally, before we close down, so floor is yours for a couple of minutes. Where can people find you?
Sure.
Interact with you. Where if get any appearances, anything that you want to kind of plug. Couple of minutes.
Sure,
Floor
man.
is yours.
Just follow me on X, Twitter, whatever, at PJ Polaco. You could also go over to Instagram, same thing, at PJ Polaco. TikTok at PJ Polaco. And if you want, I got like 20 t-shirts at the moment at prowrestlingtees.com/just incredible. They have Aldo ones, they have Justin's, they have a lot of all the Got Bloods, all the classics are there. And coming this summer, Zombie Sailor Toys is coming out with the first ever Aldo Montoya action figure.
No.
And
Wow.
later on in the year, they're coming out with a Just Incredible, Got Blood style action figure as well, the little Hasbros.
That's
So
great.
very excited. So be on the lookout for that. I don't know exactly when, but in the summer, the Aldo will debut for Zombie Sailor Toys.
That's very exciting. That's
Yeah,
very
man, I'll
exciting.
have to. I'll have to get you a bunch. I'll send them over to you.
Oh, dude, yeah, thank you. Yeah, that'd be
Yeah.
ideal. I'm just
Oh,
getting back into. I'm just getting back into figure collecting. For so many
oh,
years,
nice.
I
So,
built
so I'll
really
send you a
anything. But
couple. Well, we'll
dude,
be in touch. We'll be
yeah,
in
we will,
touch.
mate. We will. Listen, PJ, this has been an absolute blast. Thank you so much. I'm
Thank
so
you for
glad
your
that you.
kindness. I've had a
Um,
great time.
yeah,
So,
mate, and hold fire at the end. I will hit stop, but then I'll say goodbye to you properly. But PJ,
okay.
we'll do this again, mate, and it'll be a blast. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, my friend.
Take it easy, bro. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to like, share, and hit the subscribe button. Also follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Once Upon a Turnbuckle to keep updated about all future shows.